Picture this. A woman is standing in the middle of a crowded street market in Fuzhou, China, in the summer of 1927. She is not selling anything. She is not buying anything. She is simply standing still while everyone moves around her, and she is laughing. Not politely, not quietly. Deep, uncontrollable, chest-shaking laughter that draws stares from every direction. She is not losing her mind. She is one of the most composed women anyone in that city has ever met. A daughter of a Confucian scholar educated in 4 languages, trained in medicine, the kind of woman who could silence a room just by entering it. She picked up a Bible 3 years ago as an academic exercise. She never expected it to pick her up, but here she is in the middle of the market, laughing and weeping at the same time, because something has just broken open inside her that she has no vocabulary for. And into that broken open place, a voice speaks with a clarity she will remember, word for word for the rest of her life. I have not called you to comfort the comfortable. I have called you to wake the sleeping. Then a promise. What begins in one city will not end there. What begins in one generation will not end there either. A physician's daughter standing in a fish market. That is how God begins a ministry that will eventually touch an estimated 100 million people across 6 countries, through 30 years of unrelenting travel, at a cost so personal that most people who knew her in those early years could not believe the same woman had paid it. Have you ever felt the life you are living is a smaller version of the life you were meant to live? Have you ever suspected that the very thing God is asking of you is the exact thing you have been most carefully protecting? She felt both. And what God did with one willing woman who stopped protecting herself in a fish market in Fuzhou will dismantle every reasonable excuse you have constructed. But what almost no one knows is this. The commission she received that afternoon came with a price, and the discipline that let her pay it, discovered in obscurity, practiced without applause, available to any believer alive today, became the engine beneath everything that followed for 30 years. Most people walk past it entirely. This is Mabel Wu Shou-mei, a woman God did not merely change, He consumed, and the proof of what one surrendered life becomes is about to unfold. Mabel Wu Shou-mei was born in Fuzhou, China, on the 3rd of March, 1899. Her father was a Confucian scholar of some reputation, a man whose library occupied an entire room of their house and who believed that a disciplined mind was the highest form of human achievement. Her mother was quieter, more devout, the daughter of an early Chinese Christian convert. Though in that household, her faith was practiced the way some people practice a second language, fluently in private, carefully in public. Mabel grew up between these 2 worlds and belonged entirely to neither. By 12, she had read her father's library. By 15, she was translating medical texts from English into Mandarin for a physician uncle who did not have time to do it himself. By 18, she was teaching in the school attached to the Methodist Mission Hospital, not because she believed what the missionaries believed, but because she was exceptionally good at languages, and the salary was reliable. She was, by every outward measure, a contained and accomplished young woman with a future already visible from where she stood. There is one image from those early years that matters. Mabel is 17. She comes home from the school to find her mother on the floor of the back room. Not kneeling in formal prayer, but prostrate, face down, arms stretched out, weeping quietly. Mabel stands in the doorway for a long moment. She does not understand what she is seeing. She will not understand it for years. The intercession beneath her life had already begun before she had given God a single reason to pray for her. At 19, Mabel won a competitive scholarship to study nursing and basic medical science in Shanghai. She finished at the top of her cohort. She was offered a position at the hospital and turned it down. She had decided she wanted to understand disease before she treated it, so she enrolled in additional study under a German physician named Bauer, who was running a small research clinic in the city. Dr. Bauer was a meticulous man with no religious convictions, and he admired in Mabel exactly what her father had admired: the discipline mind, the precision, the refusal to reach a conclusion before the evidence was complete. She thrived under him. She also grew increasingly hollow. Nothing she studied answered the question she had not yet admitted she was asking. She described this period later simply as, "The years I was very competent and very empty." Then a colleague gave her a Bible. Not with any evangelical intention, The woman simply thought Mabel might find the historical portions interesting, given her appetite for reading. Mabel put it on her desk and left it there for 6 weeks. Then, during a stretch of night shifts when there was nothing else to read, she opened it. She read it the way her father had taught her to read everything else, carefully, skeptically, annotating questions in the margins. She gave it no evaluation. Instead, over the following 3 years, it gave her one. What broke her open was not a sermon. It was not a mission meeting. It was Romans chapter 8, read alone at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in March 1927. After a patient had died under her hands from a fever she had done everything correctly to treat. She had followed every protocol. The man had died anyway. She sat with his chart in her hands and then, without planning to, opened the Bible to where she had last left off. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God. She read it 3 times. Then she put her face down on the desk and wept in a way she had not wept since childhood. She did not know what she was weeping about. She only knew that something in those words had touched a place inside her that medicine had never found and scholarship had never reached. She went to the fish market the next morning on her way back to her lodgings. The laughter happened there without warning, in the middle of the street, and the voice, as she would later describe it, was not audible so much as unavoidable. It did not ask. It stated, they sent her back to Fuzhou within the month. A church there needed someone to run a small clinic attached to a newly built chapel, and Mabel's uncle had recommended her. She had not asked for this. She had not prayed for this. She simply said yes because she did not know what else to say to God yet, and yes seemed like the beginning of learning. The clinic was 1 room. The equipment was inadequate. The salary was less than a quarter of what she had been earning in Shanghai. This was the first price. God does not commission a voice that will reach 100 million people without first placing her somewhere no one important is watching. The obscurity was not the hardship. The hardship was the loneliness. Mabel was not a woman who made friends easily. Her precision made people feel measured. Her intelligence made people feel managed. In Fuzhou, far from the colleagues who had respected her and the city that had understood her, she discovered that she did not know how to simply be with people. She could treat them. She could teach them. She could not sit with them and be nobody in particular. God was teaching her the first discipline, and she did not recognize it as discipline yet. She thought it was failure. Then her own body gave way. In the spring of 1929, Mabel contracted typhoid. She spent 3 months in a bed in the clinic she had been running, tended by the same patients she had been treating. She was 30 years old, seriously ill, and for the first time in her adult life, completely unable to do anything useful. In that immobility, she began to read the Bible not as a text to be analyzed, but as the only thing within reach. She read slowly, because she had no energy for speed. She read aloud when she could, because the sound of the words in the room seemed to do something that silent reading did not. She later called this keeping company with the Word. She did it for 3 months because she had no other option. Her fever broke. Her strength returned gradually over weeks. The military doctors who visited had no clear explanation for the speed of her recovery given the severity of the initial infection. What Mabel discovered during those months was not a technique. It was a relationship. She had spent 3 years reading the Bible as an intelligent person reads an important text. During the typhoid, she read it as a sick person reads a letter from someone who loves them. The difference, she said, changed everything that came after. She went back to work. The clinic grew. Women came first, then their children, then reluctantly their husbands. Mabel had no particular gift for preaching. She had a gift for presence, the ability to remain entirely attentive to whoever was in front of her without being distracted by whoever was next. People felt, in her company, as if they were the only thing that mattered. This was not a natural trait. It was the slow residue of 3 months in bed learning to receive instead of produce. The discipline had formed her from the inside out, and the fruit of it was visible to everyone except her. By 1931, the clinic had become something that required a staff. Mabel found herself, entirely by accident, leading a small organization. She had no training in administration. She ran it the way she had run everything else, with precision, with thoroughness, and now with something new, with prayer as the first item on every agenda, not the last. She had learned in the typhoid bed that she could not produce what people actually needed. She could only stay close enough to the source of it to pass it along. She prayed before she diagnosed. She prayed before she made decisions. She prayed, most significantly, for people who were not in the room and who would never know she had thought of them. This was the second discipline, and it emerged from a specific night in 1932 that she never forgot. She woke at 2 a.m. with an overwhelming and inexplicable burden for the rural interior, for the villages in the mountain provinces that no foreign missionary had reached, and that no Chinese evangelist had yet chosen. Because the roads were terrible and the reception was uncertain and the cost in personal comfort was too high, she had never been to these provinces. She did not know a single person in them. She got out of bed and began to pace and pray for people she had never met and could not name, in places she had never seen. She did this for 2 hours. She went back to sleep. She woke up and went to the clinic. She told no one. She would wake this way for specific unnamed places and unreachable people for the rest of her life. The intercession was never announced. It was never turned into a program. It was simply a standing appointment with God on behalf of people who did not know the appointment existed. In 1933, an elder from a church 2 provinces away arrived at the clinic carrying a letter from his pastor. The letter said simply that their congregation had been praying for the Fuzhou clinic for 3 years and believed God was directing them to ask Mabel to come and speak at their annual gathering. She had never spoken at an annual gathering. She had never spoken at anything larger than a Bible study of 12 people. She said no. She wrote a polite and thorough letter, explaining why she was not suited to public address and suggesting several other people who would serve the gathering far better. She sealed the letter, handed it to the elder, and then sat back down at her desk and could not concentrate on a single thing for the rest of the afternoon. The letter sat in the elder's bag overnight. In the morning, Mabel asked for it back. Unopened, she told the elder she would come. She stood up in front of 300 people in a province she had never visited and spoke for 40 minutes about Romans chapter 8. She did not prepare a formal address. She simply told them what had happened to her at 2 a.m. with a patient's chart in her hands, what she had found in the Word during the typhoid, and what she had discovered about prayer in the dark. When she sat down, the room was completely silent for nearly a minute. Then a woman in the 3rd row began to weep, and within moments half the room was weeping with her. 11 people came to faith that weekend. Mabel traveled home on a wooden cart over a road that took 15 hours and sat in the back wondering what had just happened. What had happened was that a woman who had been formed in obscurity had finally stepped into the open, and the formation was visible. She had not given a speech. She had given her life, and people recognized the difference immediately. The invitations multiplied. Over the next 4 years, Mabel traveled to more than 40 cities across 6 provinces. She traveled by cart, by boat, by foot, and occasionally by something that was described to her as a bus but bore only a philosophical relationship to the category. She slept on floors. She ate what was available, which was sometimes very little. She treated patients in the mornings, spoke in the evenings, and prayed through the nights in between. She paid for every journey out of what she had, which was rarely enough, and she learned to treat the shortfall as an invitation to watch God provide rather than a signal to stop. He always provided, sometimes at the last possible moment, sometimes through channels that had no logical connection to the need, always in time. The price of the platform was the comfort she had been trained to expect. She had grown up in a scholar's home. She had been educated in Shanghai. She had been formed to expect a certain quality of environment as the natural backdrop of a productive mind. God systematically removed every piece of that backdrop and waited to see whether the productivity was in the backdrop or in her. In 1937, Japan invaded China. Mabel was in Hunan province when the news reached her. The travel routes she had been using for 4 years collapsed overnight. 3 of the 40 cities she had visited were bombed within weeks. The clinic in Fuzhou was seized and converted to a military supply station. Everything she had built over 8 years was gone in a season. She was 38 years old, stateless in her own country. With no organization behind her, no salary, no base of operations, and nowhere obvious to go, she went to the interior. If the roads had been terrible before the war, they were nearly impassable during it. But the villages that had never been accessible to missionaries were now, paradoxically, more open to a Chinese woman traveling alone than they had ever been. Because a Chinese woman traveling alone was not a military threat. Mabel moved through the mountain provinces during the war years with nothing but a bag, a Bible, and the two disciplines she had learned in the dark: the Word as daily medicine and the intercession that rose in her whether she chose it or not. These were not strategies. They were what she was made of by that point. She once spent 3 days in a village where no one had ever seen a Bible. She read it aloud for the 3 days because only one family had agreed to let her stay, and she did not want to push beyond their hospitality. And the sound of the words drew people the way music draws people. Not from argument, but from something underneath argument. On the 3rd day, 12 people asked her to tell them how to pray. She taught them what she knew, which was what she had learned on the floor of her room and in the typhoid bed and in the market in Fuzhou. Not a method, but a posture. Not a technique, but an honesty. She left the village and did not see those 12 people again for 11 years. When she finally returned in 1948, she found a church of 240 people that had grown entirely from those 3 days. The village had kept meeting. The village had kept praying. The seed, planted in obscurity, had grown in obscurity, and God had tended it through 11 years of war and displacement without Mabel knowing a single thing about it. She wept when they told her. She wept the way she had wept over the patient's chart at 2 in the morning. Not from sorrow, but from the collision of something she had believed theoretically and something she was now seeing with her own eyes. The stream had become a river while she was not watching. In 1945, the war ended. Mabel was 46. She had no clinic, no organization, no home to return to in any meaningful sense. She had her bag and her Bible, and a notebook in which she had been recording, for 12 years, the names of the villages she had visited, and any information she could gather about what had happened there after she left. The notebook was 60 pages long. The accounting in it was staggering even to her because she had never added it up before. More than 400 villages. More than 6,000 individuals whose conversions she had either witnessed or been reliably informed of. 43 small congregations that had started from nothing and were still meeting. She did not announce this. She told no one about the notebook. She sat with it in a borrowed room in Shanghai and considered it the way she had been taught to consider evidence, carefully, without sentimentality, following it to wherever it led. What it led her to was a single conviction: she was not done. The post-war period brought a different kind of cost. In 1946, a pastor named Chen from a large church in Shanghai contacted her. He had heard about the notebook and about the 43 congregations, and he wanted Mabel to come to Shanghai, establish a formal organization, raise funds from the Western missions that were beginning to re-enter China, and build an institution that could replicate what she had done informally. He was a careful, organized man with excellent intentions and considerable ecclesiastical authority. He was also, in the way of very organized people, entirely certain he understood what Mabel's ministry needed better than Mabel did. She spent 3 months in Shanghai, trying to do what Pastor Chen suggested. She sat in fundraising meetings with American missionaries who asked her to quantify outcomes and project growth rates and establish accountability structures. She tried to explain what had happened in the mountain villages during the war and discovered that it was nearly impossible to explain to people whose category for ministry was programs and staff and budgets. The notebook, which she had thought was simply a record, became in those meetings a financial prospectus, and she found that transformation deeply troubling. She left Shanghai after 3 months. She owned the failure plainly. I went where I should not have gone and tried to become something I was not called to be. The problem was the lure of legitimacy, not excluding myself. She paid with her reputation in those circles. She was characterized as difficult, as someone who did not understand scale, as someone who had done remarkable work in an informal context but was not suited for institutional leadership. She accepted this characterization without bitterness. She did not defend herself. She went back to the interior. Immediately after leaving Shanghai, the ministry entered its most fruitful period. In 1947, Mabel received a letter from a woman she had never met, a schoolteacher named Hui in a village in Guangxi province, who wrote that the woman who had passed through her village in 1939 had left behind a Bible and 12 people who knew how to pray, and that those 12 had become 120, and that the 120 had no one to teach them and needed help. Mabel went. She spent 6 weeks in Guangxi. She met Hui, who was 41, had never read the Bible in any structured way, had led a congregation of 120 people for 8 years through pure instinct and the prayers she had been taught, and who possessed more spiritual authority than anyone Mabel had encountered in Shanghai. Mabel wept when she saw what God had built. Hui wept because she had been building it alone. In 1949, the political situation in China changed everything again. The Communist Party assumed power. Foreign missionaries were expelled. Organizations that had Western funding were dismantled. Mabel, who had no organization and no Western funding, stayed. She moved more quietly. She traveled in smaller networks. She prayed with more urgency. Because urgency was the honest response to what was happening, she did not stop. In 1956, she was called before a local party official who had received a report about her activities. He was a young man, thorough and not cruel, who explained to her with some patience that religious activity outside the registered state church was not permitted, and that her continued movement through rural districts had been observed and was to cease. Mabel listened to him completely. She thanked him for his clarity. She told him she would pray for him by name. He did not know what to do with this response. She was released, she continued. She was called before officials 7 more times over the following decade. She was never imprisoned, which she herself could not entirely explain, and which she attributed simply to God's protection, and to the fact that her travel generated no paperwork and left no organizational footprint. She had no buildings, no accounts, no registered membership, no printed materials. She had a bag, a Bible, and a notebook that was now, by 1960, 230 pages long. Then her own body broke again. In 1961, at the age of 62, Mabel suffered a series of strokes that left her partially paralyzed on her left side. She spent 14 months in a hospital bed in Kunming, unable to travel, unable to speak publicly, able to read and to pray and to receive the visitors who came, in increasing numbers, to sit beside her bed. She prayed during those 14 months for villages she could not visit. She interceded from a hospital bed for people she would never personally reach. The intercessory discipline she had learned in the dark years was now the only discipline available to her, and she gave herself to it without reservation. When she recovered enough to travel, the recovery was neither complete nor comfortable. She walked with a cane. Her left hand was unreliable. She was 63 years old and had lost 1.5 years of mobility. She thanked God for the 1.5 years and went back to the interior. She did not stop until 1970. By then she was 71, and her body had finally negotiated an honest agreement with her spirit. It would carry her this far and no further. She settled in a small room attached to a church in a village outside Chengdu. She stopped traveling. She did not stop praying. Letters came from across 6 provinces, from villages she had visited 40 years ago, from second-generation believers who had never met her, but who had grown up hearing the story of the woman who came through with a Bible and 12 prayers. She answered every letter. She prayed over every name. The notebook, by the time she stopped traveling, was 412 pages long. She had never published it. She had never shown it to an institution or a funder. It was simply an accounting between her and God of what the stream had become. In her final years, she received a visit from a seminary student who was writing about the underground church in Hunan province. He had been given her name by 3 separate sources, all of whom described her as the root of what had grown in that province. He asked her what she would say had been the secret of the ministry. What had she done that others had not done? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I did not do more than others. I simply stopped protecting myself earlier." The seminary student wrote it down. He was not sure he understood it. He published his study 10 years later, in 1983, long after Mabel had died, and that sentence appeared in the introduction. It has been quoted in Chinese Christian circles ever since, by people who often do not know whose sentence it is. Mabel Wu Shou-mei died on the 14th of November 1972 in the small room outside Chengdu, in her sleep. She was 73. She had no organization. She had no published works. She had no tombstone with statistics on it. What she had was the notebook, and the churches, and the 400,000 people, a conservative estimate, as the seminary students' research eventually concluded. Who could trace their faith, directly or indirectly, to a woman who had stopped protecting herself in a fish market in Fuzhou in 1927. The stream had become an ocean, and it had been through her. You stayed until the end, and as promised, here is what kept Mabel burning for 45 years. 3 disciplines practiced without applause, available to you today. First, the word as company, not as text, study material, but as the voice of someone present. During the typhoid, she read it as a sick person reads a letter from someone who loves them. That practice healed her body and became the engine beneath every decade that followed. Second, intercession for the unknown. She woke in the night for villages she had never visited, for people she could not name, and she prayed. That prayer reached places she never went. It grew congregations she never saw. It is available to anyone willing to get out of bed. Third, the refusal to protect herself. She did not protect her reputation in Shanghai. She did not protect her dignity before the officials. She did not protect her comfort on the roads or her pride in the institutions. Every time God asked for the thing she was most carefully holding, she opened her hand. That is not temperament. That is a discipline, chosen over and over again in obscurity for decades. Mabel Wu left her father's library with every credential the educated world of her generation could offer a woman. She left the fish market with none of them. The commission did not come because she was qualified. It came because she stopped protecting herself long enough for God to reach her. The question is not whether God can use you. It is what you are still protecting.